We start a new series today, and each week from here until about Thanksgiving time, before Thanksgiving, we're going to look at a bunch of metaphors that the Bible uses about the body and about our muscles and our strength and our training and the way we can work with all those things. So each week we will try to use that wisdom of the Bible to get stronger and healthier with our faith. How we can train toward that. And if on the way it motivates anyone to get stronger and healthier with your body, that's great. So does anyone want to start with a push-up contest? I was worried someone might show up and just show me up while we do that. So what makes us strong? Muscles obviously make us strong. But even before our muscles, there's something else that holds us together and makes it possible for us to do any of those things. You can't do a push-up, you can't walk, you can't pick up a spoon if you don't have bones and things that connect your muscles to your bones. So today's parable is about building stronger faith, starting with tendons and ligaments. Anyone know what a tendon does? I don't even know if we have any doctors floating around here. Maybe. It's a connector. It connects bone to muscle. So your Achilles tendon connects, a muscle thing to a bone thing, two different things. And if that thing doesn't work, you can't walk. There's no hope. You're just not walking at all. It's done. You can roll, but you're not walking. A ligament. You know what a ligament does? Bone to bone. Exactly. There we go. Two similar things. So anyone ever have tendinitis? Yeah, a lot of I'm getting a little bit from climbing too much right now. And it hurts to do anything. And it's only worse if you don't address the pain that's sitting there. If your tendons and ligaments aren't working, it doesn't matter how strong your muscles are. You can't really do anything the way you want to do it. So in order to build a stronger body, we need healthy connections within ourselves. And in order to build a stronger faith, we need good connections between things that are similar, like people and people, and things that are different, like people and all the rest of the natural order. So that's the parable. Part of life for all people is connectedness. People to people, people to dogs, people to pickles and bees and sunshine and all those kind of things. You can be connected in a good way or a worse way. You can turn your connections to people into an idol, into an addiction, or you can do your best to shield yourself from whatever connections that are there. You can celebrate some of the special connections in your life wonderfully, or you can try to embrace all the connections in the entire web of life. But whatever manner it is by which we are connected to people and to all the other stuff in the natural order. It's just a fact of life, whether you believe in God or Jesus or Bible or any of that stuff. We are connected. But part of faithful living, once we take that step toward trying to be a little more faithful, Jesus was adamant about how people should be connected. He says, love your neighbor, which is an intentional and distinct kind of interconnectedness. Jesus was adamant about how we understand ourselves as part of a larger, unified body. So Paul says it this way: the human body has many parts, but the many parts make up one whole body. So it is with the body of Christ. That's y'all. Some of us started as Jews, some of us as Gentiles, some of us were slaves, some of us were free, but we have all been brought into one body by one Spirit, and we all share the same Spirit. So Jesus is adamant that we are unified in some kind of a way, and he's also adamant about the healthiest relationships between each other require stretching. Those of us who've had some surgery knows that it takes a lot of work to break down the ugly, angry scar tissue. And in the same way, living in a diverse world, it takes work to break down the hard, angry scars of racism and bigotry. And so to put this all, Jesus is adamant together, the good life, the faithful life, the life that tries to follow the footsteps toward God, that includes pulling and pushing together, a spiritual ligament bonding us together for a purpose. And at the same time, there are spiritual tendons that connect everything else with us. What would we do without water? What would we do without those forests, just in the beauty, but also in the breath? Some of us wouldn't want to live at all if it wasn't for pets and sunsets. And if I go to heaven and there's no sunsets and pets, not that, we want to be connected to healthy food. We need to be connected to things that grow, to beautiful things. We must be connected to things that are so small that we are forced to be compassionate and gentle. We must be connected with things that are so big that we are forced into face them with humility. We are part of a web of creation impacting each other with everything that we do. And into that fact, God is adamant that the goal of the faithful life we are called for, we are caring for creation. Genesis calls us stewards and caretakers. God is adamant that we are to appreciate beauty. Jesus came to offer life and life abundant. God is adamant that sacredness is not something that can be held by these four walls here, but sacredness is something found through the world, in all things, through all things. The psalmist says it in another place, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where could I ever hide from your presence?" It's everywhere. The sacredness is everywhere. So God is adamant that we live the good life, the faithful life. We walk by taking footsteps, taking light footsteps through the wonder of creation. Which sounds like a churchy parable. It sounds kind of saccharine. Sounds kind of simple to those of us who've been walking that way for a long time. So is there something more real about our connections, or is it just a metaphor? Is it just a way to think about life, or is there a way somehow to walk as religious people in some way that we can do, in some way for us to understand how to walk through that? Stan's going to tell us one of those ways.
Well, actually, I'm going to invite everybody to, if you're able, stand for this. Because what I want us to do is feel what Hansen has been talking about. So would you take one arm and reach it up just as high as you possibly can and give thanks that you can do that? And feel the ligaments and tendons in that arm. And look at your hand, which is one of the most amazing gifts in our lives. Think of all the things that you can do with that hand. You can do good, you can do evil, you can express kindness, you can create beauty, you can make a fist and strike out, you can sign your name. The hand is a tool that God has given to us. That wonderful opposable thumb that our evolution has given us that allows us to grip in ways that some other creatures cannot. Give thanks for your hand. And be seated, and as you're seated, notice your knees, which are also hooked together with tendons and ligaments. There was a line, Wes, that you read in Psalm 148 that just blew me away this morning. Praise God, all you shining stars. Did you hear that? Last Sunday night we were in Vermont in a desolate place with no lights. And that's where we watched that eclipse. Did any of you see a little bit of the eclipse? What was more amazing than the eclipse was that I finally saw the stars the way I saw them when I was little. That vast blanket of the Milky Way. And when we're near artificial light, we can't see it. Our eyes are blind. When we're near a bright moon, and when that shadow of the earth began to pass over the moon and it turned into a blood moon, that super moon that was so powerful, the stars were so close it felt like you could touch them. And you had a sense of being a part of something so vast and mysterious and awe-inspiring that it struck even a preacher dumb. Hansen was talking about the way others talk about this connectedness, and when we began to think about this, I thought about the Gaia hypothesis, which is something that was proposed by a chemist, James Lovelock, and a microbiologist by the name of Lynn Margulis, who developed the Gaia hypothesis in the early to mid-70s. Gaia is the Greek word for earth. They proposed the idea that organisms, all of life, the biosphere of which we are a part, interact also with their inorganic surroundings to form a self-regulating, complex system that contributes to maximizing the conditions for life on this planet. How many of you know what a lichen is? Have you ever seen lichens on the rocks around here? Yeah. Are you liking the lichens? A lichen is a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae, right? And they grow on and into stone. Think about that. Into the granite or into the places where they are living, and they form a relationship even with the stone. There's a guy here in this room who also has a very deep relationship with rock, right? I have a good friend, Roger Briggs, who is a world-class climber, and we asked him one time, why do you love the rock so much? He was a physics teacher at Fairview High School in Boulder. And he said, I am busy all day with all the stresses and conflicts and trying to get work done and teach students and resolve issues and that sort of thing. But when I'm on the rock, it demands 100% of my attention, right? And so it's like prayer for me, he said. It takes me out of that conflictual world and attaches me, and therefore that relationship to that rock is like what Lovelock and Margulis were talking about. Of course, their description is much more complex, but just listen to that definition again. Organisms, life, interact with their inorganic surroundings to form a self-regulating complex system that contributes to maximizing the conditions for life on the planet. We affect our environment as it affects us. And we can think about issues like global warming and some other areas where our behavior affects our environment. In a simple way, we can think of the earth as a single complex organism. That's how the Gaia hypothesis kind of got spun out as people in other fields began to think about it. Think of Earth as a single complex organism with component parts contributing to its life, much as we think of our own bodies having parts, and the parts being made up of cells, and the cells of smaller parts, and so on, like those little Russian nesting dolls, right? And all working together to maintain this amazing reality that we call life. In fact, there's a writer in the Bible who used just this idea, Paul, whom you read, and we'll read a little bit more of 1 Corinthians 13 a little bit later.
So on that idea of 100% focus, there's very few times in your life when you get to focus on one person or one thing with all of your being. I've mentioned up here that we get the opportunity during a wedding to see people focused on each other as much as they could ever be focused on. Another place that might happen a little bit is grandkids. You love your grandkids? You ever take your grandkid to their first parade? So there's a story about a grandpa who takes the little girl to the first parade, and he was excited about it. He built her excitement all week. Oh, we're going to go see the parade. Are you happy? She had no idea what it was. She's a little girl. She's just thinking about, Grandpa's excited, so I'm excited. And they get to the parade, and there's people, and she's on his shoulders, and she's looking at everything, and he's pointing everything out. And he says, look at those clowns over there. And she loves the clowns. She loves it. Makes her a little balloon, and she loves the clown. And then there's a car goes by with a lady that looks like she's from Disney World, and she loves that a lot. A real live Disney princess right there. And they throw her candy, and what kid doesn't like candy? And then there's the little bitty cars with the guys with the funny hats, and they're running in circles, and who doesn't like the little bitty guys with funny hats? So she's loving all these things, and there's horses, and there's police, and there's bands that are too loud for her little ears, but she loves all of it, and she says, wow, and Grandpa says, look at that, and look at that. And at the end of all of this, the girl says to Grandpa says, "Did you like it?" And the girl says, "Oh, it was great. I loved the clowns. I loved the little horse and the princess. But when are we going to see the parade?" Now, Grandpa realizes that they had watched all kinds of weird things, and she in her mind saw them as different, separate pieces, not as one unified whole thing. There's something very special when all of that comes together, and we miss that about our world, when we miss that God has given us all these beautiful things that fit into a grand miracle. We miss the grace of God if we don't see the way that all of creation works together.
Now, one of our sons just gave up on his PhD. Just kind of interesting. Partly because he said that when you're working on a PhD, you are focusing on minutia to such a degree that you lose the big picture. And that was something he noticed in his colleagues, that they were losing the big picture. We don't see how we fit in to something much larger. There's an ad on TV right now, I think it's from Toyota, that asks the question, have you ever thought about your driveway being connected to all the roads in the world? Think about that for a minute. That's pretty profound stuff. And it means that we are part of a continuous, seamless network. We may feel like just a little bit of something, but we are part of something greater because we're connected with that network. Networking, by the way, was invented by the Christian church, not by computer programming. That's something for us to remember.
So one story about how I'd been able to witness the networking. I had a friend in England, and I used to live there. And so when the friend lived there, I would go back every few months. And she lived in the very urban, white and black buildings and no parks and the soot everywhere that they were just used to. Everyone was used to the soot of the buses that go by. So it wasn't a natural place. And her flat in the back had a little patio with junk everywhere. And the only natural thing was the weeds. It was not a patio you would spend time on. It was a patio to put junk on. Some of you have rooms like that in your house. So we decided one day, we missed our garden in North Carolina. So we're going to turn this patio into a garden. So we got to work. We pulled the weeds. We threw the junk out. We cleaned the walls. We got a table and some chairs so we could sit out there. But you ever get on those projects where you just keep going, and you can't stop, keep doing things. So we're stuck. We have to keep going. So we walk down to the sundry shop and we buy a couple bags of dirt and a couple pots and a couple plants and herbs. And we come back and we plant a few things and it's looking nice. And the last thing we plant is jasmine. We plant this little jasmine plant. We found some ways to create a fake lattice so the thing could crawl up it. And we pat the dirt down and we stand back and look at it and put our arm around each other. And right at that second, a bee comes down and finds the jasmine. There wasn't another flower anywhere. And within a second, a bee found the jasmine. It was as though our little garden sewed something of the world together, some wound of disconnection. And by just planting, it was brought back into continuity. And we are called to heal those wounds so the world can come back together as one. So much of this is a matter of awareness. We've been given this table to remind us who we are and whose we are. And so often we have to have a little help to become once again aware of how everything fits together. I love hearing Chugach in the background there, by the way. What a great dog. But it reminded me of an event that happened just a few days ago, Hansen. We were in the dining room in this house that's surrounded by the vast woods of Vermont. Vermont is 75% forest. And the wild turkeys had come across through the yard, 15 or 16 of them in a flock a couple of days before. And we were all busying ourselves at various things, and our youngest, we have 8 grandsons, and our youngest grandson, Kelvin, I don't know where they got a name like that, was sitting in his high chair, and all of a sudden he said, "A deer."
And we were totally oblivious. In fact, I didn't quite understand him at first, and our son Joel said, "A deer?" And I looked out the window across the deck into the yard, and looking straight back at me was a white-tailed doe. Beautiful, beautiful. And I would have completely missed that moment if that little child hadn't been aware and seen something that I didn't see. And then in a moment, another doe and a fawn came through, and we just watched in rapt wonder while they were there, and realized, and this is something that blessing animals does for you, realize that these are not just random things. We are connected one to another. As St. Francis said, these are our brothers and sisters, just as surely as we are human brothers and sisters to one another. They are our neighbors, and when Jesus calls upon us to love our neighbors, I don't think he's just talking about human beings. I think he's talking about all of creation. From the tiniest single-celled organism to the great whales, from the tiniest algae to the giant sequoia, all of the enormous diversity of life is interconnected and vital to the beauty and vitality of earth and creation. And that brings us back to 1 Corinthians 12. And I want to read just a little bit more here of that passage. Hansen read that part where he reminded the members of the Corinthian church of their various backgrounds. They were Jews, Greeks, slaves, free, male, female, but all had been called to drink of one Spirit. Then he goes on to say, so the body is not one part, but many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I don't belong to the body, in spite of this, it still belongs to the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body, in spite of this, it still belongs to the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? I love this surreal description that obviously we need to hear the sense of humor in the Bible. Sometimes it gets way too lofty. Now God has placed the parts, each one of them, in the body just as God wanted. And if they were all the same part, where would the body be? It would be like thinking that, like not seeing the parade, you know. And if they were all the same part, where would the body be? Now there are many parts, yet one body. So the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. Nor again the head to the feet, I don't need you. So here's the idea that I referred to earlier when I was talking about the earth and all of life, and even the inanimate or inorganic parts of this glorious system. All of this is together an interconnected, diverse system. Here Paul talks about the church as a body. And we could add, if we were all tongues, where would the eyes be? Or noses? Or whatever happened to be your favorite part. The point is that diversity is not just a nice idea. It's like that T-shirt that says, gravity isn't just a nice idea, it's the law, right? Diversity within unity is not just a nice idea, it is essential, Paul says. Now I know there's probably never any conflict in this church. People never disagree. They all get along perfectly without ever getting angry at one another, hurting one another, or whatever. But in other churches that I've been involved in, and certainly in the larger church, there's plenty of tension and disagreement and fault-finding and judging and all of that goes on because some people just can't stand diversity. And if that's true, they're not reading the Bible. Because Paul tells us here that diversity within the unity is not just an interesting idea. It is essential. How many people do you have on your session, Hansen?
6.
6.
Plus.
6 in a good year, right? When you can find some. And they all agree perfectly. And they all, I hope that we obey the principles of the Presbyterian Church, and when we elect members to the session, they're representative of all those different kinds of people, well-educated and just wise, male and female, older, younger, people from different backgrounds with different persuasions. We're required to have a group of leaders because they'll learn from each other and they will open each other's eyes. And they will, just as our grandson did the other day when he made us aware of a deer that we would have missed. And a numinous experience of locking eyes with another species. And for a moment, do you ever wonder, what's the deer thinking? I work with horses on a daily basis, and I always wonder, what are they thinking when I look into their eyes? And they teach us things that we couldn't learn in any other way. They have an awareness that we don't have, and they can open a new world to us. And so the diversity and the connectedness in a single whole is just the nature of things. And we should give thanks that God did not make us all look alike. I always ask people when I talk about this passage to look around the room and decide whether they think we all look alike. We're all different sizes and shapes and backgrounds, and we have different kinds of abilities and awareness. And that is essential, because that's what brings life and vitality. So the diversity and difference in the church that causes folks to disagree and conflict sometimes can also be seen, in fact must be seen, as an essential strength when we gather at the table, as we do not just with ourselves here today in this one place, but indeed today we gather with people all around the world, just like the symbol on this stool. Because all around the world in every time zone today, there are people coming to this table. And it's one table, even though it takes many forms in different places. I remember worshiping in Italy many years ago and not understanding much, because I'm not very fluent in Italian, except that I noticed that the Italian of the priests, this happened to be a Catholic church, the Italian of the priests was a pure, beautiful, uninflected Italian, and I went back home and asked my daughter-in-law why their Italian was so smooth and beautiful and well articulated, and she said it's because they're all Polish. I had difficulty understanding what was going on until the place in the service where everyone stood up and someone turned to me and put out his hand and said, "Pace, pace, peace, brother." I suddenly felt one with all these different people. And I hope some of you have had experiences of worshiping in other cultures and with other languages, and to realize that the glorious thing today is that in every time zone around the world, as the earth turns and the sun shines on different places, there will be people gathered at this table celebrating our diversity, but also our unity at the table. We belong to Christ, and we belong to and nourish each other in our diversity and unity. And this table invites us to be intentional about our connection to each other. We're going to sing a hymn now, is that right?
That sounds good.
And it's about tongues. And so let's turn to that.